Alright folks, welcome to another edition of Lid Tips, the ham radio show where we talk about and discuss topics that are of interest to ham radio or amateur radio operators. In today's episode, we're doing our October Q&A, and this is where we take a look at past questions and comments on other videos posted to the channel. It's a good opportunity for everybody to participate and help steer the direction of the channel. Before we get started, I did want to say there's some buttons down below. A like button, a comment button, a subscribe button. Go ahead and click them. It'll make you happy. Now let's get started. So before we get started, I wanted to share a quick story, because I like sharing stories. About when I pulled a stand move, is what I call them. Anyhow, I had put a new antenna up in the backyard, and I set up the 7300 to run on Whisper. I was going to go do something else, maybe catch up on some YouTube videos or something like that, while it ran, and I wanted to just see what my antenna propagation looked like. I wanted to see how it was getting out. And ran it for a few hours, and then I came back, and I took a look at it, and I said, hey, that doesn't look too bad. Shut everything down, and then about a day or two later, I came back, and I wanted to try some FT8. And I turned the radio on and fired up WSJTX and started up. I started calling CQ and wasn't hearing anything back. And I didn't notice anything that was working wrong. I was keeping an eye on the SWR meter, and I wasn't seeing anything that looked suspect. So after about 15, 20, 30 minutes, I didn't get one reply back. I started responding to people's CQs and nothing. I wasn't getting anything. So I looked in PSK Reporter, and nobody was hearing me. Maybe one person pretty close by. And I said, what the heck is going on here? So I check all the connections from the radio to the tuner, from the tuner to the choke, and I go outside and I check the coax connection to the antenna, and everything's fine. There's nothing wrong. The counterpoise was attached fine. The element was attached fine. I come back inside and I switch from my power supply to a battery because I'm thinking it might be some kind of CMC issue, and that's not it. It's still not working. Then I start checking through all my configurations in WSJTX, and that's fine. And I check the configurations on the radio, and I'm like, what the heck is going on here? And I cannot figure it out. Turns out that I had set my radio to 1 watt when I was doing the Whisper tests, and I never turned it back up. So that was my stand move. All right, now let's get started. So these comments come from the video where I was tuning my end-fed half wave, and my buddy Don Gibbs says, thanks for the update. Hurricane Sally got my MFJ and end-fed about halfway down the wire. Got to make a splice and retune it. And that sucks, but the good thing about Don is he's taken the time to learn how to build or repair antennas and work on ham radio equipment. And that's an important skill set for everybody to have. You never know when something like this is going to get you, and you certainly don't want to go out and have to buy a new antenna. So to be a responsible ham, a good ham, a good upstanding member of the community, take the time to build some skill sets around building or repairing equipment. And then Jeff, he's out in Oklahoma, if I remember correctly. He said he needs to get another antenna up himself. His was acting weird, and it ended up being corrosion. Maintenance is key. Good video, and thanks for sharing. 73 Jeff. And this kind of goes to the same comments I made towards Don. You really need to know how to maintain, repair, and build equipment, especially in the antenna realm, or you're going to run into problems. There's just no question about that. So this comment comes from one of the videos where I did on chokes, ballons, and ununs, or chokes, toroids, and ununs. I can't remember the names of them, but if you check out my playlist, you'll see it. He says, excellent introduction to toroids, materials, and use cases. As a QRP operator, which is around 5 watts or below, the half-inch size is about as big as I go. I can confirm in my experience that size doesn't matter. Well, he says it's the mix that's important, and I would agree the mix is probably the most important aspect. He says he also stacked 2 1/2-inch toroids for QRO of 50 watts. That works well too. It's just even more of a challenge to wind those little beasts. I tell you, sometimes winding those things is a total pain, and especially if you use thicker gauge wire or enamel wire. I actually worked on one earlier this morning with enamel wire, and I was ready to throw the whole thing in the trash. I did want to say that if you have to stack the toroids, one of the things that you can do is you can put a little bit of crazy glue in between them and let it set. And that works really well for holding them together. Or you can put like a single wrap of like say if you had two of them stacked like this, you could put some electrical tape around the center here going this way. A lot of times you'll see people who wrap their Toroids all the way around with different types of tape. And I wouldn't recommend that because the Toroids get hot and you want them to be able to cool. And that tape will act as an insulation. So the best bet for here is to use the Crazy Glue. H. Higgins, he talks about clamp on toroids, and he says it can be very useful for noise suppression more than balance. There are many caveats regarding their use besides the mix. The two of those are how well does it ID match the inner diameter, match the outer diameter of the cable, and do the halves of the core meet precisely when put together. And when you use beads, the snap-on beads, you do want to make sure that you do have the right mix because you might be suppressing or rejecting current that is not the current that you're worried about or at the frequencies that you need it to, I guess is the right way to say that. So you can get snap-ons. I bought some snap-ons from Palomar, and I actually I did have a mismatch between the inner diameter of the toroid and the outer diameter of the coax. So what I did is I just made a big coil and I ran the coax through 3 times on the beads, and I had 4 beads on there. So that gives me 12 passes, and I call that my RFI Busta. And it works pretty well. And I use that in between my radio and my tuner. Patrick Dickey asks a question, and he says, can you mix them? What I mean is put a 43 and a 31 together, at least on the same feed line to keep your attenuation low across all bands. And you can put 2 chokes, one after the other. But I wouldn't recommend that. What I typically do is I put a choke at my antenna feed point, and that gets anything that's coming in off of the antenna and then hitting my feed line. And you have to be careful with your feed line as well and make sure that it is not a multiple of a quarter wave for any of the bands that you're operating on. And we'll talk more about that in future videos. But what can happen is that your feed line or your coax can act as an element or an antenna and pick up frequencies as well, or pick up signals, I should say. And so I also put another choke at my entry point into my shack, or where my coax goes into my tuner. And I try to use the same ones, but I could easily have put a 31. Actually, I did have a 31 when I used the chameleon choke. That is a 31 mix, and then the larger toroid that I have with the coax wrapped around it is a 43. So I do it, and I haven't noticed a problem. So go ahead and give it a try and let us know what happens. So this comes from a video where I used some Anderson power poles to make a charge adapter for my Yaesu FT70D. And John Buck says, looks like Anderson power pole connections are becoming the de facto standard for the hobby. And they are. People use them. And once you start using them in your shack, it is really easy when everything is Anderson power poled, because you can move batteries, you can move power supplies, you can plug them into distribution blocks. It just makes life much simpler. I wouldn't quite say the de facto standard, because a lot of the radios that come from the factory actually have like Molex connectors and stuff like that on them, which are all fine connectors. The reason I go with power poles, which might not be the best engineered solution, is it's extremely convenient, and I can buy a bag of them relatively cheap and just crimp them on. They're pretty easy to use. The other thing I was going to say is, based off of Philip's comment, power pole the world. That's something that you hear a lot in the ham radio community, and that way, if I use power pole adapters for my radio, and say I go to field day or I go to a POTA activation and my buddy's got a battery there that has power pole connectors on there, we can interchange equipment and we can share gear. And a lot of people say power pole the world. He says if they're good enough to charge his forklift, I don't have a forklift, so I don't know. He says they're good enough to power his G90, and I would agree with the G90. I power poled mine. So KC5TGT, radios and more, he says he really likes this idea. He's got 2 FT70D radios and he loves them. So it's a great little radio with a lot going for it and a good price point. I love my FT70D. I don't use it as much as I should. It sounds fantastic. It has a great super heterodyne receiver on it, so it's very clean when it picks up signals. I will, just being honest with it, the battery life isn't what I want it to be, and that's part of the reason why I built that charging cable. And the other one is that when you program it from the computer, you have to go through like a voodoo dance ritual to get everything working correctly. We have to take the battery off, power it on, power it off, plug it into the wall, put the battery back on. It's really difficult. And when you say ham radio should be easier, not more complex. And then really Mike from K8MRD Radio Stuff, he dropped by to say something. He said, "Nice build, buddy. Power pole the world." See, you do hear that a lot. He said he did the same thing for many of his radios. You need some helping hands, though, and shrink wrap around that plug all the way, son. Come on. I was a little nervous about putting it up all the way that it was going to mess with those threads, so I didn't do that. I do have a pretty nice set of helping hands, but he's talking about when I was doing some of the solder work. I was just soldering on the desk, and I was using probably something to brace it up. Hey, I like the redneck style soldering. I said the helping hands have just been sitting over there, not getting much use. So Christiana's got a good set of eyes on her. She said, you heat shrunk your bag of power poles. And I did. So when I was making that cable, the bag of power poles was sitting pretty close to where I was using the heat gun. And I did shrink the bag of them. So what I did is, let me just reach over here, and hopefully I can get this without too much commotion, is that now I keep the power poles in the Palmetto slice jar. So that way I don't have to worry about shrinking a bag anymore. So Chris, this is from the same video. Chris says, clean wiring job. I like the backup battery bank idea. Slap a solar charging system on that battery, and then you are off-grid and mobile. And again, that's kind of the end state or the goal that I'm looking for, is I want to be able to use my radio equipment in the field more, and I want to be able to use it in the event of some sort of disaster. I'm not going to say zombie apocalypse or SHTF, but what if power goes out from a hurricane or something like that, or a snowstorm, or who knows what? I do want to make sure that I can still charge and use my gear. So this comment comes from the MFJ Giant X cross needle SWR and watt meter video that I did, and Don N5 SKT, another one of the Don Army. He says, Ape, I have the high power version of the meter and I use it to tune my amp. I love it. The only problem he has is how short the cord is, but that is minor. You can extend the cord, just get some new cable, get yourself a 5.5 barrel jack, millimeter barrel jack, and then some power poles, and then whip you up a longer cord. The cord's long enough for me, but I have my meter pretty close to the power supply, so that's not an issue. What I really like about that meter, and if you haven't seen it, check out the video, is the display is monster size. I think it's 3.5 inches in diagonally across. It has a really bright LED behind it, and it makes reading your SWR super, super easy. Actually, the one I used in the video, I passed along to a buddy of mine who's building a ham shack, and he's got a little bit older model Yaesu radio, and it's got an SWR needle meter on there, but it's a little bit hard to see. And since he's starting from ground up and has helped me out with a bunch of stuff, I just said, hey, if you want this meter, you can have it. And he was pretty happy about that. This comes from the same meter video. Susan says, I'm happy. She must have clicked the buttons below, and if you haven't, there's still time. She says, nice looking meter. And then Clark, who's a staple in the Smokin' Ape channel videos, he says, thank you, Ape, very fine video. So I'm glad that some folks like that video. It was a fun one to make, and the meter's definitely cool. So Don, again, he commented on the what I was calling the portable Pi ham shack, where I did a video with a 10.1 inch IPS display, converted it over to DC power, and then used a Raspberry Pi 4 and some other stuff to make a fully battery capable. It all runs off of my Bioenna battery Raspberry Pi station. And the reason I'm doing that is, like I was saying earlier, is I want to have everything be capable of running off grid. He says he has an inline keyboard, which is just a little bit larger and operates the same way. He won't use Bluetooth as he finds it unreliable, but these other keyboards, 2.4 gigahertz. And I was using a 2.4 gigahertz instead of a Bluetooth keyboard. It's a really small keyboard by Rye. And I had heard from other people that were having problems with Bluetooth as well. He said he picked up a monitor that KB9RWL. That's Kevin. If you are not subscribed to Kevin's channel, you're really missing out. He's very technical, and he's got a great way of storytelling. So check him out. Also, check out Don's channel. He said recommended in his video he used a 13-inch 1920 by 1080 Pi monitor. I really like it and can run off of the power from the Pi, so you can actually charge it off of your GPIO pins or from the same way that you charge your Raspberry Pi. He said he needed the buck converter, and it's a Drock buck converter that I got off of Amazon. They're about $12 for 4 of them. It's 12 volt to USB if you're interested. But he included the link for this monitor, and I went and checked it out, and it's sweet. It's not about $150 though, so I'm not going to be picking it up anytime soon. But it was really cool, so might be something worth checking out. Then John Tarbox, he said, nice video. I downloaded the files for the juice box and have one printing now. The buck converters are on order from Amazon. His question was, how do you switch the power on and off? Did you consider adding a power switch to the juice box? The juice box is packed up right now, so I don't have it with me. So you might want to check out the Portable Pi Ham Shack video. And it's just a little power pole, Anderson power pole powered distribution block that has one power pole set in, two out, and then it also has a USB out that I use to run the Raspberry Pi on. In talking to my buddy Rob, who helped me design the power pole box, we chose not to put a power switch on there. And the reason being is because the box is meant for portable use. It's not for long-term operation. One of the things that you need to be aware of is that Drock USB buck converter has an LED light on there. So if you leave it plugged in and on all the time, it's going to drain your battery. But because it's going to be used in a portable situation, I don't think it's going to be plugged in all the time. So we did not add a power switch to it. It's something you could do, but that juice box is really a tight fit, and it would be a job to get one in there. From the same video, I was talking about that one of my Drock buck converters didn't work, and I think I might have damaged it when I was getting frustrated building the juice box. The first time around, because it was a tight fit, it requires a lot of precision cutting, measuring, and stuff like that. And I think I broke the buck converter. So Jim says, "Wait, what? You get excited and lose control? Say it ain't so, Ape. It's so." He said, "Thanks for showing all the parts you use on the setup. I'm glad you had luck with wireless keyboards on Raspberry Pi." He's had less luck. He's using the same Raspberry Pi 4 variant of the IPS screen, and he's had a good experience with it. Again, for those a little cheaper keyboards, I use a Wi-Fi Bluetooth keyboard at home, but it's a Logitech keyboard and mouse, and it was like $50. There's really small keyboards. They're like $15-20 off of Amazon. I don't think that the Bluetooth implementation in them is as good as it should be, and that's why I think a lot of folks have problems. And folks, that's going to wrap up this video, so I just wanted to say a couple things. One of them is that if you want your comment featured, go ahead and leave one below on this video or any of my other ones, and it might get selected. The other thing I wanted to say is thanks for watching, everybody. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments, recommendations, or suggestions, go ahead and post them below, and I'll do my best to respond. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it.